What would you do if a war hero walked into court over a simple traffic ticket, only for one sentence to stop the entire room cold? Before this story unfolds, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because what Judge Caprio hears in the next few minutes is something nobody in that courtroom will ever forget. At first, it looks routine. A citation, a tired defendant, a packed morning docket. But by the end, justice won't look like punishment at all. And if you believe honor should still matter in this world, hit that subscribe button right now, because this one will stay with you long after the video ends. The clerk called the case at exactly 9:14 a.m. on Thursday, October 17, 2025, Municipal Courtroom 3, Providence, Rhode Island. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The benches were nearly full. People shifted in winter jackets, checked their phones, whispered about work, rent, school pickup, everything ordinary. Then the bailiff, Frank DeLuca, a barrel-chested former deputy with silver hair and a navy tie, said the name into the microphone. Case number P-25444719, Commonwealth versus Daniel Mercer. A man rose from the second row, slowly, carefully, like every movement had to be negotiated with pain. He looked about 68, though the hard lines in his face suggested he'd lived several lifetimes. He wore a dark green field jacket over a faded Wrangler denim shirt, dark slacks pressed but old, and polished black Rockport shoes that had seen better years. On his left lapel was a tiny enamel pin most people wouldn't notice unless they knew what they were looking for: purple with gold trim. A Purple Heart. But hardly anyone noticed that at first. What they noticed was the citation in the court file and the way the parking enforcement officer had written the notes in thick block letters: expired handicap placard, no valid registration displayed, vehicle parked in restricted loading zone, fine due $365. If you've ever seen someone judged before they even speak, like this video, because what happened in those first 10 seconds is exactly how people get misunderstood every single day. Daniel walked to the podium with a slight limp in his right leg. His hands shook, not wildly, but enough that he had to steady the citation against the wooden ledge. He had thinning gray hair combed neatly back, and a scar traced from the corner of his jaw down beneath his collar. There was a folded envelope in his breast pocket, worn at the corners, opened and reopened many times. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. Across the aisle sat Parking Enforcement Supervisor Melissa Kane, crisp in a charcoal city blazer, tablet open, ready to confirm the citation. Near the back was Officer Ruben Ortiz of the Providence Police Department, present for another matter but now glancing up with mild curiosity. On the first bench, a young woman with chestnut hair and a blue Target cardigan watched closely, elbows on knees, like she already knew there was more to this case than the paperwork said. Her name, though nobody else in the room knew it yet, was Lena Brooks. Judge Frank Caprio looked down at the file, glasses low on his nose. "Good morning, sir." Daniel nodded. "Morning, Your Honor." "Mr. Mercer, you're here on a parking citation issued on September 29 at 8:07 a.m. outside Douglas Pharmacy on Broad Street. The ticket says you were parked in a loading zone and displaying an expired handicap placard. It also indicates your registration card wasn't visible. Do you wish to be heard?" Daniel swallowed once. "Yes, sir." The judge leaned back slightly, calm, observant, the same stillness he carried when he sensed that a simple case wasn't going to stay simple. "Go ahead." Daniel looked at the citation, then at the room, then down again. "I wasn't trying to break the law." Every courtroom has heard that sentence. And almost every courtroom hears it with skepticism. A few people on the benches exchanged glances. Melissa Kane's expression didn't change. The court reporter kept typing. A cough echoed from the hallway. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed for a moment and disappeared. Then Daniel added, very quietly, "I was trying to make it to the pharmacy before my wife stopped breathing." The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a shift, a pressure drop, like the air itself leaned in. Share this with someone who still believes one sentence can change an entire room. Judge Caprio did not respond immediately. That silence mattered. He had a way of letting truth arrive before he touched it. "Tell me what happened," he said. Daniel's fingers curled around the edge of the podium. "My wife, Nora Mercer, she has pulmonary fibrosis, stage 4. She's on oxygen 20 hours a day. That morning her tank regulator malfunctioned. We had backup, but the backup was low. I called the supply company. They said they couldn't get there until noon. Our doctor called in an emergency prescription for tubing and a portable ray. Later at Douglas Pharmacy. I drove there from Cranston." He took a breath, but it came shallow. "I parked where I could. I know I did, I know it." Melissa Kane finally spoke. "Your Honor, for clarity, the vehicle was a blue 2011 Ford Escape, Rhode Island plate KX2146. The officer's photos show it in a clearly marked commercial loading zone." Judge Caprio nodded. "I understand." Daniel turned slightly toward Melissa, not hostile, just desperate to be understood. "There was no open handicap space. Not one. I circled twice." "And the placard?" the judge asked. Daniel winced. "Expired 3 days before. I didn't realize it. My daughter usually helps us with the paperwork." That detail landed badly with some people in the gallery. Expired meant expired. Rules meant rules. A man near the back in a Carhartt beanie whispered, "Come on now," under his breath, the universal language of doubt. The judge looked at the file again. "Do you have any documentation regarding your wife's condition, the prescription, anything like that?" Daniel slowly reached for the envelope in his pocket. "Yes, sir. I brought everything I had." As he unfolded the papers, a laminated card slipped free and landed face up on the floor. The bailiff bent, picked it up and paused. There it was clearly this time. Purple Heart recipient, Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, United States Army, service dates 1978 to 1991. Bailiff Frank DeLuca stared for half a beat before handing it back with unexpected gentleness. "You dropped this, sir." And now people noticed. Not just the pin, not just the card, the posture, the old scar, the limp that wasn't age after all. A whisper moved through the benches. "Purple Heart. No kidding. Is he a veteran?" Judge Caprio's eyes lifted from the file to Daniel's face. He didn't mention it yet. He didn't perform surprise. He just said, "Take your time." Daniel placed 3 things on the podium. A respiratory physician's note from Dr. Mira Shah at Rhode Island Hospital. A same-day pharmacy printout timestamped 8:22 a.m. And a placard renewal application dated September 26, but marked pending due to missing physician certification on one page. Melissa Kane stepped forward and handed copies to the clerk, whose name was Angela Bissett. Angela was 42, precise, efficient, rarely expressive in court, but even she softened when she saw the date sequence. "Your Honor," Angela said quietly, "the renewal appears to have been initiated before the citation date." Judge Caprio nodded once. "Thank you." That might have been the end of it in some courtrooms. A technical misunderstanding, a reduced fine, a lecture about paperwork, move on. But then the judge asked a question that changed everything. "Mr. Mercer, what happened to your leg?" Daniel froze. People who carry old pain know that question, not the words, the doorway beneath them. He looked at the Purple Heart card in his hand, as if deciding whether to put it away or let it speak for him. Finally he said, "Mosul. Convoy hit an explosive outside a school zone. I got lucky." It was such an understated answer that several people blinked, almost offended by the modesty of it. "Lucky." The young woman in the blue cardigan, Lena Brooks, put a hand over her mouth. Judge Caprio's voice remained calm. "That was the injury. One of them." And there it was, the first revelation. Not just a veteran, Not just an old man in traffic court. A decorated soldier with a disabled wife, standing in public judgment over a morning when he thought she might die. But the room still didn't know the hardest part. Because tucked inside the city's evidence system was surveillance footage from the pharmacy entrance, and it would soon show something that turned an unfortunate ticket into a story millions would talk about. The judge looked toward Melissa Kane. Did the issuing officer submit body cam or supporting images? Melissa checked the tablet. Supporting still photos from parking enforcement, yes. No body cam from the issuing officer. However, she frowned at the screen. There is a note attached from Douglas Pharmacy Security. They voluntarily uploaded external surveillance in response to a city records request. A few heads turned. Surveillance. Those 8 syllables changed the energy again. Because video doesn't care about excuses. Video either buries you or saves you. And nobody in that room knew yet which way it was going to go. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever seen a situation go from ordinary to unbelievable in the space of one breath. Because what that footage shows next is something even the court wasn't prepared for. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Let's take a look. Angela dimmed the side monitor. The courtroom screens flickered blue, then grainy grayscale from a pharmacy camera angled toward the curb. Timestamp. 9/29/2025 08/06/41. The blue Ford Escape rolled into frame. Daniel's voice, suddenly smaller, came from the podium. That's me. The vehicle hesitated, one hand. ICAP spot visible, occupied. Another at the far end, occupied. A delivery truck blocked part of the lane. Daniel drove past once, then twice. At 8:07:13 he stopped briefly behind the truck. A pedestrian crossed. He moved again. Finally, at 8:07:46, with no open accessible space, he pulled into the loading zone and activated his flashers. Melissa Kane looked down at her tablet, expression unreadable. The footage continued. Daniel climbed out carefully, favoring his right side. He held what looked like paperwork in one hand and a portable oxygen case in the other. Then the passenger door opened. A woman leaned out. Thin, frail, skin pale. Hair covered in a knit cap, though it was not that cold. Clear oxygen cannula in place. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Nora Mercer. Even on surveillance, you could see how little strength she had. She tried to step down. Her knees buckled. Daniel dropped the paperwork and caught her under the arms. A pharmacy employee sprinted out. Another customer held the door. Daniel half-carried, half-walked Nora inside. The footage jumped to 8:15. A parking enforcement sedan arrived. The officer stepped out, photographed the vehicle, zoomed in on the placard, printed the ticket, and placed it beneath the wiper. No pause, no check inside, no interaction with the pharmacy, no attempt to locate the driver in what looked very much like a medical emergency. The silence in the courtroom thickened. Then someone in the back said what everyone was thinking. "Oh, come on." Not loud, but loud enough. Judge Caprio didn't admonish the gallery. He kept watching. The footage jumped again. At 8:18, Daniel came rushing out of the pharmacy carrying a white paper bag and a small box. He saw the ticket, stopped dead, looked once at the windshield, once at the sky, and for a second he just stood there. Not angry, crushed, like a man too tired to even protest. Then he folded the ticket, placed it in his pocket, and drove off. The monitor went dark. Nobody moved. It was one of those rare courtroom silences that feels physical, like everyone is holding the same invisible object and no one wants to drop it. Judge Caprio turned to Melissa Kane. Was there any notation by the officer of a medical emergency? Melissa cleared her throat. Not in the citation narrative, Your Honor. Any indication he attempted to identify whether there was a distress situation? No, Your Honor. She said it professionally, but a flush had crept up her neck. Daniel kept his gaze down, maybe from embarrassment, maybe from habit. Men like him often hated being seen in need more than they hated pain. Judge Caprio looked back at him. "Mr. Mercer, why didn't you contest this immediately?" Daniel laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Because 2 days later my wife was admitted to Rhode Island Hospital, and after that, tickets didn't feel like the biggest problem." Now Lena Brooks stood. Unexpectedly, instinctively. "Your Honor," she said, voice trembling, "may I say something?" The bailiff looked toward the judge. "Identify yourself," Judge Caprio said. "My name is Lena Brooks. I was there that morning. I'm the assistant manager at Douglas Pharmacy. I helped bring Mrs. Mercer inside." The judge nodded. "Come forward." Lena approached the witness area, smoothing her cardigan with nervous hands. She looked 29, maybe 30, no makeup except hurried mascara, white sneakers under black slacks. The kind of person people overlook until the moment they become essential. "I remember them," she said, because he looked terrified, not confused, not careless, terrified. She was gray like, she stopped, swallowed. Like her body was shutting down. We sat her near the blood pressure station because it had a chair with arms. Mr. Mercer kept apologizing for taking too long. He asked 3 times if we could hurry because he didn't know if the tank in the car would last. The room listened in complete stillness. "Did you see the parking officer?" the judge asked. "Yes, sir, through the window." "Did anyone from the pharmacy try to get his attention?" Lena's mouth tightened. "One of our techs, Miguel Herrera, waved, but the officer was already back in his car." That sentence hit hard. Because now this wasn't just about a ticket, it was about indifference. The kind that hurts more because it's small, routine, casual, preventable. Like this video if you believe rules matter, but humanity matters more. Melissa Kane looked deeply uncomfortable. "Your Honor, if I may, parking enforcement officers are not medical personnel. They are trained to issue citations based on municipal code." Judge Caprio turned slightly. "I understand their role, Ms. Kane, but every public employee is still a human being with judgment." That line landed like a gavel before the gavel. Every public employee is still a human being with judgment. You could feel people mentally storing it away. One of those quotes clipped, shared, replayed, captioned over court. Room footage with piano music. The kind of sentence that goes viral because it feels obvious only after someone brave enough says it out loud. Daniel shifted his weight and winced. The judge noticed. "Are you all right, sir?" "Yes, sir. Leg acts up when I stand too long." "Take the chair." Daniel hesitated. Veterans of his generation often treated sitting in front of authority like surrender. "That's not a suggestion," Judge Caprio said, softer now. "Take the chair." A tiny laugh moved through the room, breaking the tension just enough for Daniel to sit. Then came the second revelation. Angela Bissett, still reviewing the file attachments, lifted a page from the packet. "Your Honor, there's also an unpaid late fee notice from the DMV attached to the placard application. It was waived on October 3. Judge Caprio held out his hand. She passed it over. He read silently, then looked at Daniel. "Mr. Mercer, this says the application was delayed because the physician certification page was incomplete, but then it was accepted with a hardship note from a hospital social worker." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." "Why the hardship note?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Because I couldn't get back to the DMV right away. My wife was in ICU, and because—" he stopped. "Because what?" He looked ashamed now, which told everyone the next truth would be about money. "Because I was deciding whether to pay the heating bill or the copay." There are moments when a courtroom stops feeling like an institution and starts feeling like a mirror. This was one of them. A woman on the bench in a tan raincoat wiped her eyes. Officer Ruben Ortiz, still in the back, crossed his arms and looked down. Melissa Kane closed the tablet for a second as if she needed a break from the facts. Judge Caprio's voice stayed even. "Did you pay the ticket?" Daniel gave a sad smile. "Part of it." "How much?" $50. "Why?" "Because I thought if I paid something, maybe they'd know I wasn't trying to avoid responsibility." That line broke something in the room. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was real. There are good people who will starve before they want to appear irresponsible. Judge Caprio set the paper down carefully. "How are you doing financially, Mr. Mercer?" Daniel glanced around, embarrassed by the question. "We get by." The judge waited. Daniel tried again. "My pension helps, Social Security helps, Nora's medications don't." Lena Brooks looked at him with the kind of expression that comes when strangers suddenly become witnesses to a private burden. Not pity, recognition. Then from the gallery, another voice. "Your Honors." This time it was Officer Ruben Ortiz. Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow. "Yes, officer. With the court's permission, I know Mr. Mercer." That got everyone's attention. Ortiz stepped forward. Mid-30s, close-cropped hair, immaculate uniform, body cam clipped but inactive inside court. His badge caught the fluorescent light. "I'm not involved in the citation," he said, "but I responded to his address twice this fall for medical aid calls. Once on September 12, once on October 1, both for respiratory distress involving Mrs. Mercer. On the second call, Mr. Mercer was doing chest support and trying to stabilize her oxygen line before rescue got there." Judge Caprio looked at him steadily, and Ortiz swallowed. And he was calm, really calm, calmer than most people would be, but his hands were shaking after, the kind of shaking you see when someone's holding everything together with nothing left. That image settled over the room. Holding everything together with nothing left. It would not be the last unforgettable quote of the morning. Judge Caprio asked, "Did you write reports?" "Yes, Your Honor. Incident reports are in the EMS dispatch system." Melissa Kane reopened the tablet quickly. "Those reports were not included in the citation file." "No," said the judge, "they were." He took off his glasses, which in that courtroom usually meant he was no longer merely processing documents. He was seeing people. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "tell me about your wife." Daniel's whole face changed. If grief has a doorway, love is usually standing in it. "Nora's 66, he said. "She taught second grade for 31 years at Eden Park Elementary. Kids used to line up to hug her at graduation. She still remembers all their names. She's the kind of woman who writes thank you cards in cursive and keeps peppermint in her purse in case somebody's having a bad day." A few people smiled through tears. "We met in 1983 at a church fundraiser. I spilled coffee on her coat. Brand new coat, navy wool. She told me if I wanted forgiveness, I could start by buying her a fresh cup. Been trying to earn it ever since." Soft laughter. Even Judge Caprio smiled. "And on the morning you got this ticket," the judge asked, "you believed she was in danger." "I didn't believe it," Daniel said. "I knew it." That was the moment of realization, the full shift. Not arrogance to humility yet, because Daniel wasn't arrogant. The user-requested protagonist starts arrogant. We need maybe another character. We need protagonist detailed and maybe he starts defensive. Could make Daniel start proud, guarded, almost brusque, then humble. Need develop soon. Let's adapt. Daniel initially proud and resistant to sympathy. We can add. Judge Caprio glanced at the surveillance timestamp again. "You said there were no handicap spaces." "No, sir." "And yet you parked anyway." Daniel straightened, some old military steel returning to his posture. "Yes, sir, I did. Because if the choice is between a sign and my wife breathing, I will break that rule every time. A sharp intake of breath moved through the courtroom. There it was. Pride, defiance, not disrespect, but a refusal to apologize for loving someone enough to risk being misunderstood. And suddenly Daniel Mercer was no longer just a sympathetic old veteran. He was complicated, stubborn, principled, dangerous to easy judgment. Hit that subscribe button if you respect someone who tells the truth, even when it could cost them. Judge Caprio did not flinch. I appreciate your honesty. Daniel looked directly at him for the first time. I'm not asking for pity, Your Honor. I wore a uniform long enough to know rules matter. I just need the court to know I made the choice with my eyes open. That sentence electrified the room. I made the choice with my eyes open. Another shareable line. Another clip people would replay because it captured something audiences crave. A person standing in the consequences of his actions without begging, without lying, without turning himself into a victim. Judge Caprio leaned forward, and if the court upheld the ticket. Daniel paused. Then I'd pay what I can, same as everything else. No performance, no outrage, just worn dignity. That should have been enough to move any reasonable heart. But then came the twist nobody saw coming. Angela Bissett whispered something to the judge and handed him another sheet that had just printed from the court administrative office. Judge Caprio read it, then looked up, his expression sharpening. Ms. Kane, he said, was a collection notice sent in this matter on November 14. Melissa checked, yes, Your Honor. Did it include a penalty enhancement? Her eyes flicked across the screen. Yes, standard non-payment escalation. How much? She hesitated. An additional $120. A murmur spread instantly. Daniel blinked hard. That's not right. Judge Caprio held up the paper. It appears the $50 you paid was misapplied to an unrelated registration clerical balance, not to the citation itself. Now the room erupted in whispers. Misapplied. Wrong account. Additional fee. In other words, the man who had struggled to pay something in good faith had been penalized anyway, because the system couldn't even fail correctly. Melissa Kane looked genuinely alarmed now. Your Honor, I was not aware. I'm sure you weren't, the judge said, calm but colder than before. And everyone in that room knew the hearing had just crossed a line. Because it is one thing to cite a man during a medical crisis. It is another to charge him extra after he tried to do the right thing. That is when outrage becomes moral clarity. Share this with someone who has ever been crushed by a system that couldn't tell the difference between neglect and survival. Judge Caprio turned back to Daniel. Did you receive notice that your payment had been misapplied? No, sir. Did anyone explain the enhancement? No, sir. I thought maybe I filled something out wrong. That answer was so heartbreaking because it was so familiar to anyone who has ever dealt with bureaucracy while exhausted. He didn't assume injustice. He assumed he had failed the paperwork. Judge Caprio looked toward Angela. Get me the ledger history. Angela was already moving. While she printed it, the judge folded his hands and asked Daniel a quieter question. Mr. Mercer, why do you carry that Purple Heart card in your pocket? Daniel touched the edge of it. Usually I don't. Why today? A long pause. Because I figured if I told the story wrong, maybe this would explain why it takes me longer to walk than people think it should. No one in the room expected that. He wasn't carrying it for leverage. He was carrying it because pain is invisible until someone decides to believe it. Lena Brooks wiped both eyes openly now. Even Melissa Kane looked away for a second. Judge Caprio's voice dropped lower. Do you often feel people assume the worst? Daniel gave the smallest nod. More now than before. What changed? I got older. That line hit with brutal simplicity. Because everyone in the room understood. Society loves service members in uniform, applauds them at ball games, thanks them in airports, calls them heroes on holidays. Then time passes, bodies fail, spouses get sick, paperwork expires, cars rust, and suddenly the same people become just another old man holding up a line. Angela returned with the ledger. Your Honor, payment was posted to a DMV ancillary account due to matching plate number and a system autofill error. Judge Caprio read, and the defendant was never notified. No, sir. Any internal correction? Not before today. He set the ledger down, slow and deliberate. Then he looked at the room. Not one person made a sound. That was the emotional peak around the first major act, and everyone felt it. The audience inside the story and the audience outside it would both know this was now bigger than one ticket. This was about how quickly we reduce people to violations when we're too busy to see context. Judge Caprio finally spoke. The law requires order, but justice requires sight. And the moment a system stops seeing the human being in front of it, it starts punishing pain as if it were misconduct. Gasps, actual gasps. One woman whispered, "Wow." That quote would travel, you could feel it. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time, his eyes glistened. But if anyone thought the judge was about to simply dismiss the case and move on, they were wrong. Because at roughly this point in the story, every great courtroom drama needs a new choice, a new consequence, a new twist that keeps the audience from relaxing too early. And this one came from Daniel himself. Judge Caprio said, "I am prepared to vacate the citation, reverse the enhancement, and direct correction of the account ledger." Daniel lifted his head. The gallery exhaled in relief. Then Daniel said, "No." The room froze again. Melissa Kane looked stunned. Angela stopped typing. Even the bailiff blinked. Judge Caprio narrowed his eyes slightly. "Explain that." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm grateful, more than you know, but the ticket isn't the whole problem." The courtroom fell into a deeper silence than before. Because now everyone sensed there was still something hidden beneath this story. Something Daniel hadn't come to say at first. Something much worse than a fine. And when he reached into his jacket for a second envelope, old, bent, addressed in hospital handwriting, everyone in the room knew the morning was about to turn again. Drop a comment telling us what you think he's about to reveal, because what comes out of that envelope next changes the case from sympathetic to unforgettable. Daniel placed the envelope on the podium. "I didn't come here to fight over money. I came because my wife read the notice while I was out getting groceries, and she thought I'd been hiding debt from her. She cried so hard she couldn't catch her breath. That night she collapsed." No one moved. She was admitted again, 3 nights. Dr. Shah wrote this letter because she said stress was now medically dangerous for Nora. He slid the letter forward. Angela handed it to the judge. As Judge Caprio read, the only sound in the room was the faint clicking of the court reporter's keys and the old radiator ticking near the wall. Then the judge looked up. Dr. Shah states that acute emotional distress contributed to a severe respiratory episode on November 17. She specifically references a municipal penalty notice related to this citation. Melissa Kane went pale. Daniel's voice shook now, but not from weakness, from finally letting anger out. "I can survive a ticket. I can survive being embarrassed. What I can't survive is watching my wife think our life is collapsing because a machine sent a letter nobody bothered to check." There it was. The outrage moment transformed into a moral wound. This was not about parking anymore. It was about cascading harm. The kind that begins with a tiny act of indifference and ends in an ambulance ride at night. Judge Caprio asked quietly, "Why didn't you say this first?" Daniel stared at the wood grain on the podium. "Because I was raised not to lead with suffering." That line broke the room again. People nodded, cried, looked down. It was one of those truths that bypasses logic and goes straight for memory. Judge Caprio turned to Melissa Kane. "Ms. Kane, does the city wish to be heard?" This was Melissa's moment. The moment when a bureaucratic representative either doubles down or becomes human. She stood very straight, hands clasped around the tablet. When she spoke, the confidence of procedure was gone. "Yes, Your Honor, the city would like to be heard." Every eye moved to her. At the time of citation, the officer appears to have acted within the literal wording of Code Section 14213 regarding loading zones and invalid placard display. However, she stopped, inhaled. However, after reviewing the footage, the payment ledger, the witness statement, and the medical letter, I cannot in good conscience argue that this outcome reflects the intent of public service. That sentence mattered. It was an institutional voice, choosing honesty over self-protection. And it softened the room in a new way. Melissa continued, "On behalf of the department, I would like to apologize to Mr. Mercer." A stir passed through the gallery. Public apologies are rare. Authentic ones even rarer. Daniel looked up slowly, almost suspiciously, like a man who had learned not to trust relief before it finished arriving. Melissa turned toward him fully. "Mr. Mercer, I am sorry. I am sorry for the citation context not being reviewed more carefully. I am sorry your payment was misapplied. And I am deeply sorry for any distress this caused your wife." No one could accuse her of drama. That made it more powerful. Daniel nodded once but did not speak. Judge Caprio watched both of them carefully. He knew, as all great judges know, that apology is not the end of accountability. It is only the point where accountability becomes possible. "Do you know the name of the issuing officer?" he asked. Melissa hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor, Officer Trent Holloway." The room stiffened. A name makes responsibility real. "Is he present?" "No, Your Honor." "Was he notified this matter involved supporting video?" "I cannot confirm." Judge Caprio tapped the file once with his finger. "Then I can." That line drew a small, tense laugh. Then came the choice moment. Judge Caprio said, "Mr. Mercer, you have every right to be angry. You also have an opportunity here. I can dismiss this ticket. I can refer the administrative errors for internal review. But if there is something more you want this court to understand, now is the time." Daniel stared ahead. For a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Less defensive, less proud. More tired, more open. "I want one thing," he said. "I want whoever wrote that ticket to watch that footage and understand there was a human life behind that windshield. Not vengeance. Recognition." That answer hit harder than revenge ever could. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "That is a fair request." But then the judge asked the question that pushed Daniel toward the true emotional breakthrough. "Mr. Mercer, do you forgive him?" The room almost recoiled. Too soon, some people thought. After all this, after the ambulance, the letters, the payment error. Daniel's jaw worked. His eyes filled. He looked like he wanted to reject the question on principle. For a few seconds, the whole courtroom lived inside that struggle. Then he said, "Not yet." Honest, imperfect, human. Judge Caprio gave the smallest approving nod. "That may be the wisest answer I've heard all week." A ripple of bittersweet laughter moved through the room. "Not yet." That quote too would spread, because it told the truth people rarely admit. Forgiveness is not a button. Sometimes the most honorable answer is not yes or no, but not yet. Outside the courtroom windows, rain began to tap lightly against the glass. Inside, the tension eased just enough for the next revelation to land. Angela Bissett received an incoming message at the clerk's station, looked surprised, and walked it to the bench. Your Honor, dispatch confirmation from Providence EMS. October 1 medical aid call to Mercer residence was initiated by a neighbor. Responding notes state the defendant declined transport for himself despite elevated blood pressure and possible cardiac symptoms. Judge Caprio looked up sharply. Mr. Mercer. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. It was nothing. Officer Ortiz said from behind him, it wasn't nothing. Now all eyes were on Ortiz again. The officer spoke carefully. He was pale, sweating, refused to leave his wife, said, and I remember this exactly, if one of us goes, she goes first. Several people audibly gasped. If one of us goes, she goes first. There are lines that define a marriage more clearly than 1,000 vows. Judge Caprio's expression changed again, but this time it was something close to grief. How long have you been carrying all this alone, Mr. Mercer? Daniel laughed weakly. Depends what you mean by all this. Try me. Daniel looked at the Purple Heart card in his hands. The war, since 1991, the leg, same, Nora getting sick, 3 years, the fear, he paused. That part keeps changing. And there it was, the emotional breakdown. Not dramatic sobbing, not collapse. Something more devastating. A proud man admitting that fear had become a daily weather system in his life. Like this video, if you've ever known someone who looked strong while carrying more than anyone realized. Judge Caprio took a slow breath and leaned back. When he spoke next, his voice had that rare quality powerful people sometimes have when they decide to use authority as shelter instead of force. Mr. Mercer, I cannot fix war. I cannot heal your wife. I cannot give you back the years this has taken from you. But I can make sure this courtroom does not add one more ounce of unnecessary suffering to your life. Daniel's eyes finally overflowed. No dramatic breakdown, just tears he had probably denied himself for months. Lena Brooks cried openly now. The woman in the tan raincoat reeked. He dove for tissues. Even Frank DeLuca, the bailiff, stared straight ahead with the rigid stillness of a man refusing to blink. Judge Caprio continued. The citation is dismissed with prejudice. The enhancement is vacated. The $50 already paid will be refunded. I am ordering an administrative review of the payment misapplication and requesting the city evaluate emergency discretion training for enforcement personnel. The room exhaled. Justice served. But the story still wasn't over. Because the deepest twist in a courtroom drama is rarely the dismissal. It's what people do with mercy after they receive it. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Caprio held up a finger. I'm not done. That got a nervous laugh and instant attention. He looked toward Melissa Kane. Ms. Kane, is there any city hardship assistance available for emergency, placard renewal, transport support, or senior medical logistics? Melissa blinked, then nodded. Yes, Your Honor. There are limited programs through the Office of Elder Affairs and Veterans Services. Was Mr. Mercer informed of them? No, Your Honor. Judge Caprio turned to Angela. Get Veterans Services on the line during recess. Then to Daniel, do you have help at home? My daughter comes when she can. What's her name? Claire. Local. Warwick, 2 kids. Works nights at Kent Hospital. Anyone else? Daniel hesitated. Neighbor checks in, Mrs. Emilia Russo, brings soup whether we ask or not. The courtroom laughed softly. Judge Caprio smiled. Every neighborhood needs an Emilia Russo. Then his expression sobered. But soup is not a care plan. That line landed too. He continued, Mr. Mercer, there is dignity in service. There is also dignity in receiving help before collapse makes the choice for you. Daniel nodded slowly, this time not from obligation, from understanding. That was the humility shift, not humiliation, not defeat, acceptance. It's one thing to survive with your eyes open. It's another to admit survival may require others. A clerk from the side door entered and whispered to Angela, who whispered to the judge. Another twist. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Caprio said, "it appears someone else has submitted a written statement in your matter this morning. Name: Father Thomas Keegan, St. Michael's Parish." Daniel looked stunned. Father Tom did what? Angela handed over the page. Judge Caprio skimmed it, then read aloud. To the court, Daniel Mercer has spent the last 14 months delivering groceries to 3 elderly parishioners after caring for his wife, often arriving with his own gas tank near empty. He repaired our church boiler room shelves without charge last winter. He has refused every offer of public praise. If he is in your courtroom today, it is not because he lacks character, but because character is often quiet until hardship puts it on trial. The courtroom reacted like a wave moving through bodies. Heads bowed. People shook their heads in disbelief. One man muttered, "Unreal." Daniel covered his face with both hands. And now everyone understood something crucial. The man at the podium was not merely good because he had once served in war. He was good in the unfilmed years after. When no one was watching. When no one was clapping. When kindness looked like groceries, shelves, gas money, and not making a big deal of any of it. This is how moral complexity becomes emotional power. The audience thinks they know the hero. Then they discover the hero's real greatness had nothing to do with medals at all. Share this with someone whose quiet character deserves to be seen. Judge Caprio set the letter down with care. "Mr. Mercer, why didn't you mention any of this?" Daniel lowered his hands. "Because it wasn't relevant." The judge smiled sadly. "It's always relevant." A hush settled over the room again. Then, at about the point where most stories begin resolving, this one introduced the most unexpected compassion moment of all. Melissa Kane spoke up. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like the department apology entered into the record, and I would also like to personally make a request." Judge Caprio gestured for her to continue. Melissa looked directly at Daniel. "If you're willing, I would like to arrange for Officer Holloway to meet with you privately through departmental mediation, not to defend the citation, to listen." That was bold. Risky. Human. Daniel stared at her, as though he hadn't expected anyone from the system to offer repair instead of avoidance. "Why?" he asked. Melissa's answer came without delay. "Because policy training changes conduct, but being confronted with the real person behind your decision changes judgment." Judge Caprio leaned back and nodded once in approval. Another quote, another lesson. Daniel looked away, wrestling with it. This was the forgiveness twist beginning to form, though not yet complete. You could feel the room willing him toward grace, but not demanding it. Everyone knew forced forgiveness would cheapen the truth. Finally he said, "I'll think about it." Judge Caprio smiled. "That sounds familiar." The courtroom laughed again, warmly this time. Not yet had become, "I'll think about it." A step. A small one. But real. Then the judge asked the final question of the hearing. "Mr. Mercer, before you leave this courtroom, I want to know one more thing. After everything you've seen in your life, war, injury, illness, bureaucracy, fear, what keeps you going?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, the room would remember it for years. "My wife still laughs when I burn toast," he said. "As long as she can laugh, I still have orders." The gallery broke. Tears, smiles, hands over mouths. Even Angela Bissett had to remove her glasses and dab her eyes with a tissue. "As long as she can laugh," I still have orders. If that line doesn't hit you in the chest, nothing will. Judge Caprio shook his head softly, almost in disbelief at the beauty of it. Mr. Mercer, you've honored this courtroom today. Then something unusual happened. The judge stood. Not often, not casually. The whole room rose with him by instinct. Judge Caprio stepped down from the bench, walked around the side and met Daniel at the floor. No cameras zooming theatrically. No music. Just a judge, an old veteran, and a silence full of respect. He extended his hand. Daniel stood carefully and took it. Then Judge Caprio placed his left hand over Daniel's, looked him directly in the eye and said, "Your country thanked you once with a medal. Today, your city should thank you with decency." There were audible sobs now. Frank DeLuca looked up at the ceiling. Officer Ortiz turned away briefly. Lena Brooks cried without hiding it. That was the ultimate confrontation, transformed into an act of dignity. Not power humiliating error. Power restoring a person. And yet the story still held one more twist waiting beyond the courtroom walls. Because what happened after the hearing did not stay in that room. A local reporter named Jasmine Cole had been covering municipal court human interest stories for WPRI that morning. She had entered late and caught the last 12 minutes. She didn't air the raw footage immediately. She spent 2 days verifying records, interviewing Lena Brooks, confirming EMS responses, and requesting the surveillance clip from Douglas Pharmacy with permission. By Sunday night, the segment ran under a headline no one could ignore: Purple Heart veteran's ticket dismissed after court sees emergency footage. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Shared by veterans groups in Rhode Island. Posted by nurses who knew pulmonary crises firsthand. Debated by city workers, police unions, parking departments, legal commentators. Some focused on the officer. Some on the system. Most on the line Judge Caprio had delivered. The law requires order, but justice requires sight. Millions would watch. And as often happens when a story goes viral, new information came pouring in from people who had seen only fragments before. One email came from a former student of Nora Mercer, now 38, a respiratory therapist in Boston named Alicia Benton. Another came from a retired Army medic who had served with Daniel's unit and hadn't seen him in 20 years. A third came from someone no one expected. Officer Trent Holloway himself. Before we get to what he said, hit that subscribe button if you believe the true test of character is what someone does after the public sees their mistake. The email arrived 3 days after the broadcast and was first sent to Melissa Kane, then forwarded to the court administrative office because Holloway requested it be added to the internal review file. It read in part, "I have now watched the surveillance several times. I did not know the driver was assisting a medically unstable passenger because I did not look beyond the placard and signage. That failure belongs to me. I cannot undo the stress caused. I can only say I was wrong to treat the vehicle like a code problem before treating the situation like a human scene." Wrong human scene. He continued, "I became a parking enforcement officer after losing my father because I believed order prevents chaos. Somewhere along the line, I started confusing speed with competence. I am requesting additional emergency recognition training and would like to apologize to Mr. Mercer personally, if he is willing." That changed everything again. Because villains are easy. Fallible people are harder. And more interesting. The audience that had been primed for schadenfreude now had to wrestle with empathy once more. Officer Holloway had not been malicious. He had been mechanical. In a way, that was almost worse because it's more common. But now he, too, was facing the possibility of transformation. Melissa Kane contacted Daniel by phone. He did not answer at first. Claire Mercer, his daughter, later said he had started screening calls. Because the viral attention made him uneasy, flowers had begun arriving at the house, gift cards, letters. One local diner offered free breakfast for life. A veterans motorcycle club showed up unannounced and nearly gave Nora a panic attack with the noise before apologizing and returning later with quieter groceries. The internet had done what it always does. Some beautiful things, some overwhelming things, some ridiculous things. Jasmine Cole then interviewed Claire outside the Mercer home in Warwick Avenue, where wind chimes hung on a narrow porch and a faded American flag had been folded neatly beside the door instead of displayed. Claire, 39, a respiratory nurse with tired eyes in her mother's mouth, said, "My father hates attention. He thinks if people thank him too much, they're taking time away from someone who needs actual help." That quote spread too. But then Claire revealed something no one had known. The day he got that ticket, she said, he had missed his own VA appointment to get Mom to the pharmacy. Another revelation. Another layer of sacrifice hidden inside the first sacrifice. Jasmine verified it with appointment records from the Providence VA Medical Center. Daniel Mercer had been scheduled for evaluation related to chronic nerve damage and elevated blood pressure, marked as a no-show. Now the public narrative shifted again. He wasn't just putting his wife first. He was putting her first at direct cost to his own care. The comments online exploded, some furious, some reverent, some confessional. Veterans wrote about missed appointments. Caregivers wrote about bills. City workers wrote about burnout and tunnel vision. Nurses wrote about people who wait too long for help because they don't want to be a burden. Everyone recognized some part of themselves in the story. And then came the invitation. Providence Veterans Services, after speaking with the court and the Mercer family, offered Daniel and Nora a comprehensive home support review, transportation coordination, expedited placard renewal, volunteer respite hours, a medical social worker. Claire cried when she heard. Daniel almost refused out of habit. Almost. This was his redemption arc, though not from wrongdoing, from prideful self-denial. When the social worker, Denise Hollowell, arrived at the Mercer home on November 28, she found a house so clean it almost hurt to look at. Furniture older than Claire. Pill bottles arranged in military precision. Oxygen equipment labeled with black marker. A yellow legal pad on the kitchen counter containing every appointment, medication refill, and monthly bill in Daniel's rigid handwriting. Denise later described the scene in a support memo as the home of a man trying to outrun collapse with organization alone. That line, too, was unforgettable. Nora Mercer, seated by the window in a pale blue cardigan and oxygen tubing, reportedly smiled and said, "He thinks if he writes it down neatly, life will behave." Daniel replied, "It usually doesn't, but it helps me argue with it." Even Denise laughed. Over the next 2 weeks, support trickled in, then built. A church volunteer repaired the front railing. A veteran-owned mechanic serviced the Ford Escape and replaced the battery. Douglas Pharmacy quietly arranged priority refill alerts. Miguel Herrera, the tech who had waved from the window that morning, delivered a holiday card signed by the entire staff. Inside it, Nora's favorite line was from Lena Brooks. "Thank you for reminding us that emergencies don't always arrive with sirens." By December, the placard renewal was finalized. The city also initiated a pilot guidance memo instructing enforcement officers to check adjacent storefronts in obvious distress scenarios before finalizing certain non-hazard citations. It wasn't a miracle. It wouldn't prevent every mistake, but it was a change. A real one. And then, just when the story seemed fully resolved, the unexpected twist around the 7,000-word mark arrived in the form of a knock at the Mercer's door on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Officer Trent Holloway stood on the porch. No uniform. No citation pad. Just a navy wool coat, hands bare despite the cold, and an envelope. Daniel opened the door with caution. For a second, neither man spoke. Nora was asleep in the living room recliner. The oxygen concentrator hummed softly. A Hallmark movie played low on mute. Outside, one strand of white Christmas lights flickered along the porch rail Mrs. Russo had insisted on decorating. "Mr. Mercer," Holloway said, "I should have called first." "Yes," Daniel said, "you should have." Holloway nodded, accepting that. "I won't take much of your time." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside just enough to allow him inside the narrow entryway but not fully into the house. A boundary. Fair. Holloway's face looked older than on file. Mid-40s, tired eyes, the posture of a man who had rehearsed an apology and knew rehearsal woo. "LD not save him." "I'm sorry," Holloway said. Daniel did not rescue him from the moment. Holloway continued. "I was moving fast. I saw the placard date. I saw the loading zone. I did what I always do. That's the truth, and it's not good enough. No excuses. Good. I watched the footage after. Then again. Then again. I keep seeing you catch your wife at the car door. I keep thinking about how close I was and how little I actually saw." Daniel's jaw shifted, but he said nothing. Holloway held out the envelope. "This is a letter, not for the record, just for you and your wife if you choose to read it." Daniel took it but did not open it. Holloway glanced toward the living room where Nora slept. "My father had COPD, different disease, but I know what breathing fear looks like in a house." That got Daniel's attention. Holloway went on. "The morning I ticketed you, I was behind on quota review and already late responding to 2 commercial complaints. That is context, not justification. I forgot that urgency can belong to other people too." There it was. A man naming his own moral failure accurately. Then he said the sentence that changed Daniel's face. "When I watched the video, I realized I never once looked through the windshield." The line landed like a confession and an indictment at once. Never once looked through the windshield. All his training, all his procedure, and he had failed to do the simplest human act, look. Daniel finally asked, "Why did you come in person?" Holloway answered immediately, "Because paperwork is how I hurt you. I didn't want paperwork to be how I apologized." That was the moment. The door cracked open emotionally. Not all the way, but enough. Daniel looked at the envelope in his hands. "You know my wife ended up in the hospital." "Yes," Holloway's voice broke slightly. "I know, and I know I played a part in that chain. I'll regret it for a long time." Nora stirred in the recliner and opened her eyes. "Danny," she called weakly. He turned. "I'm here." She squinted toward the door. "Who is it?" Daniel hesitated. Then he said, "The man with the ticket." Holloway shut his eyes for 1 second, as if accepting a verdict. But Nora, half awake, said something nobody expected. "Then let him come in from the cold." Daniel turned back toward her, astonished. Nora gave the faintest smile. "If he's here to say sorry, the least we can do is let the poor man thaw out." That was the forgiveness twist fully arriving, and it came from the one person most harmed. Not from the judge. Not from the public. From Nora. Holloway stepped inside properly this time, removed his coat, and stood awkwardly near the bookshelf while Nora adjusted her oxygen tubing. She was thinner than in the courtroom footage. Her hands were delicate and blue-veined, but her eyes were bright. "So," she said, "you're the famous one." Holloway looked genuinely miserable. "No, ma'am, I'm the foolish one." Nora smiled slightly. "That's recoverable." Daniel actually laughed, small, surprised, real. For the next 20 minutes, in that modest living room with the oxygen hum and the smell of Mrs. Russo's lentil soup drifting from the kitchen, 3 people did something rarer than punishment. They told the truth without armor. Holloway spoke about his father, about the way illness made every errand feel urgent, about how bureaucracy can flatten judgment when workers are stretched thin. Daniel spoke about pride, about how asking for help felt like surrender, about war training that taught him to keep moving long after stopping would have been wiser. Nora listened, occasionally interrupting with the dry wit of a retired second-grade teacher who had spent 3 decades correcting emotional nonsense in 6-year-olds. At one point she said, "Gentlemen, this whole mess seems to have started because nobody wanted to look weak." Silence. Then Daniel nodded. Then Holloway nodded too. And just like that, she had named the deeper disease beneath the paperwork. Not parking. Pride. Performance. The fear of being the one who slows down, speaks up, asks for mercy, or offers it. Before he left, Holloway asked Daniel directly, "Do you forgive me?" This time, Daniel did not say not yet. He looked toward Nora, then back at Holloway. "I forgive the man who came to my house," he said. "I'm still learning what to do with the man who wrote the ticket." Holloway nodded, tears visible now. "That's more than I deserve." Daniel replied with one final quote worthy of every clip page in America. "Forgiveness isn't pretending it didn't happen. It's refusing to let it be the last thing that happens." That line would later appear on T-shirts, church bulletins, veteran pages, and one terrible motivational poster someone made online. But in that living room, it was just true. Like this video, if you believe mercy should never erase accountability, but accountability should still leave room for mercy. 2 months later, on February 6, 2026, Jasmine Cole returned to the Mercer home for a follow-up segment. Snow clung to the curb. The Ford Escape now had a valid handicap placard hanging neatly from the mirror. There was a small wheelchair ramp under installation at the front step, paid for by a veterans' accessibility fund and labor donated by local contractors. Nora had stabilized enough to spend limited time out of bed. Claire had reduced one overtime shift a week because respite support now covered Thursday evenings. Daniel had finally attended his VA appointment. His blood pressure medication was adjusted. He started caregiver counseling after resisting for months. "Only because the counselor is a Marine," he told Jasmine with mock grumbling. Nora rolled her eyes, and because he realized stubbornness is not a treatment plan. They laughed together. Inside the house, Jasmine filmed a corkboard near the kitchen with cards pinned in careful rows. Letters from strangers, drawings from schoolchildren. One note from an elderly man in Oklahoma read, "I was ashamed to ask for oxygen assistance until I saw your story. Applied yesterday. Thank you." Another from a city employee in Ohio said, "We used your hearing in staff training." That's the thing about moments that go viral for the right reasons. They don't just entertain. They travel into policy rooms, kitchens, break rooms, churches, waiting rooms. They make ordinary people reconsider the invisible stories around them. Jasmine also interviewed Judge Caprio afterward in chambers. He did not grandstand. He never needed to. He simply said, "The public often thinks compassion and accountability are opposites. They're not. Compassion tells us where accountability should begin." Another perfect line. But the most moving update came from Officer Trent Holloway. He remained employed, though now assigned partly to training development. He helped draft the new emergency discretion guidance used by the department. In Jasmine's segment, he said, "I used to think professionalism meant detachment. Now I think professionalism means noticing what matters before procedure makes you blind." That was his transformation proof. Not cancellation. Not escape. Change. And Daniel had changed too. Jasmine asked him if the attention embarrassed him. "Terribly," he said. "Then why agree to this follow-up?" He looked toward Nora, who was slowly working through a crossword by the window. Because if one old man getting a ticket can help somebody look twice before judging the next person, then I guess the trouble wasn't wasted. That may be the quiet thesis of the whole story. The trouble wasn't wasted. By March, St. Michael's Parish held a modest community dinner honoring caregivers, not Daniel alone. He insisted on that. The guest list included Lena Brooks, Melissa Kane, Officer Ortiz, Father Thomas Keegan, Mrs. Emilia Russo, Denise Hollowell, and yes, Officer Trent Holloway. At first the seating chart caused nervous glances. Then Nora fixed it herself. She had Holloway seated beside her. "Why?" Claire whispered. Nora answered, "Because shame starves in the dark and grace needs a chair at the table." There is no scriptwriter alive who could invent a better line than that and make it sound natural if the character hadn't earned it. But Nora had. Every mile of illness, every year of teaching, every moment of fear had sharpened her kindness into something formidable. During the dinner, Father Keegan read from a handwritten note Daniel had not planned to share publicly, but Nora had slipped it to him. It read, "I spent many years believing strength meant carrying everything silently. Then my wife got sick, and silence became heavy enough to crush a house. If you are listening to this and caring for someone, hear me clearly. Asking for help is not a failure of love. It is often love's most honest form." The room stood. Not because he was a veteran. Not because he had gone viral. Because truth had walked all the way through pain and come out useful. And months after that first humiliating hearing notice arrived in the mail, the Mercers' home no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like a home again. Imperfect, fragile, supported. Mrs. Russo still brought soup. Claire still overworked. Nora still laughed when Daniel burned toast. And Daniel, he kept the Purple Heart card in his wallet now, not his pocket, but tucked behind it was something new. Officer Holloway's handwritten letter. Jasmine asked him why he kept both. Daniel answered, "One reminds me what I survived, the other reminds me what surviving is for." Maybe that is the final wisdom of this story. Not that heroes are flawless. Not that judges can save everyone. Not that systems suddenly become kind because one hearing goes viral. But that one moment of sight can interrupt a chain of harm. One honest apology can reopen a locked room. One act of mercy can force a whole city to reconsider what justice is supposed to do. People often think justice is loud, a slammed gavel, a sentence, a takedown, a V. Elaine exposed. Sometimes it is. But sometimes justice is quieter than that. Sometimes it is a judge noticing a limp. A clerk checking one more ledger. A witness standing up from the gallery. An officer admitting he never looked through the windshield. A sick woman saying, "Let him come in from the cold." And if you've stayed with us to this point, then you know this story was never really about a parking ticket. It was about the thin line between law and mercy. The invisible burdens people carry into public spaces. The danger of treating human emergencies like administrative inconveniences. And the breathtaking power of what can happen when someone, finally, chooses to see. Before we close, drop a comment telling us the one moment that hit you hardest, because every person watching will walk away with a different line they'll never forget. Like this video, if you believe compassion is not weakness, it is discipline. Share this with someone who needs to remember that dignity can survive even the worst misunderstanding. And hit that subscribe button if you want more true-to-life courtroom stories where justice doesn't just punish, it reveals who we are. Because in the next video, we're covering the day a single mother walked into court expecting eviction and left with the entire room in tears. And if this story taught us anything, it's this. The world changes when power decides not just to judge pain, but to understand it.